Thank you for coming. Let me say a special word of welcome to Sheikh Ra'id Salah. He's here today with us. He will not be speaking, but we welcome him under these very happy occasions. We have 6 members on the panel today, including the leader of our legal team, Mr. Tayyib Ali. He will speak after me, and Jeremy Corbyn MP, as well as the representative from the Islamic movement, Mr. Zahi Nujaidat, Ismail Patel, the chair of Friends of Al-Aqsa, and Sarah Colburn from the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. This is a moment we've waited for 10 months. It should not have been, but we waited patiently, and today we can say with pride that all our assertions in the past have been vindicated and upheld in a British court of law. The fact is, the Home Office had hastened to make a decision about Sheikh Ra'id Salah. She had not examined those facts carefully, and as the judge ruled, she was misled. I must say, in the beginning, that the issue was never one of hostility to Jews, animosity to Jews as a people, of religion or ethnicity. This was always about Israelis' policies and the rights of Palestinians and Muslims to criticize those policies. I should also draw to your attention that this discourse is now part of the mainstream. Only last Sunday, in his Easter address, the outgoing Archbishop of Canterbury, Dr. Rowan Williams, pointed out to the humiliating treatment of Palestinians in the Holy Land. Shall we now say that Reverend or Archbishop Williams is an anti-Semite? No, we cannot make such an assertion. There are 3 lessons to be learned from this sad episode. First of all, that British officials need to address the facts carefully before they make decisions. And it is not just those in government or from one particular party, because I must recall that the chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee himself, on the 2nd night after Sheikh Ra'id was arrested, he appeared on Newsnight and he said that Sheikh Ra'id went to Birmingham. This was entirely untrue. And a public official appearing on Newsnight and making such a false allegation. And this is why we're here today. And this individual, Mr. Keith Vaz, he sought, as it transpired, to have a meeting with Sheikh Ra'id subsequently, but he was not allowed to proceed because the media took him to task. So again, this is another lesson, that the media has to create the space necessary for a fair and open debate and discourse on Palestine. The third and final lesson from all of this is that our officials, they need to be even-handed. What transpired in the court was that the British government, the Home Office, listened to one side of the party, of the dispute. They listened to the Board of Deputies, they listened to the CST, but they did not listen to any Muslim or Arab organization in London. In future, from this point onward, we need to be even-handed. We need to be balanced. This is an opportunity to change course in our relations, an opportunity to be more forthcoming and in our thrust, in our efforts to secure justice for the Palestinians and for, indeed, British citizens. I now hand you over to the chief and head of our legal team, Mr. Tayyib Ali.
Thank you, Daud. Could I just, as a cautionary note, explain that Sheikh Salah is in the room. He's sitting in the front row, directly in front of me. Unfortunately, Sheikh Salah cannot speak to you at all, and that's because of the bail conditions the Secretary of State for the Home Department still imposes on him. he can attend this meeting, and I'd ask the members of the press not to speak to him, as the Secretary of State might interpret that incorrectly as him breaching his bail conditions and speaking to the public, and we wouldn't want Sheikh Salah to be arrested for a further misinterpretation of an event. What I want to do is just speak to you very slightly about some of the background. On the bail issue point, we have requested that the Secretary of State removes the entirety of Sheikh's bail conditions, and once he's done that, once she's done that, he will be able to speak to you. Now, if she acts as expeditiously as she did to exclude him, which in my view was 17 minutes, we might, by the end of this conference, actually hear from Sheikh Salah. I'll check my emails at the end of the conference just to see. Now, a little bit of the background. The exclusion order was issued by the Secretary of State for the Home Department as a personal decision on the 23rd of June 2011, and it was based at that time on 3 points. And the very short points, so I'll for the benefit of you all, I'll read them out to you. The first one was a quote which was said to have been given by Sheikh Salah in one of his poems. And the quote, as it was presented on that date, reads, "You Jews are criminal bombers of mosques, slaughterers of pregnant women and babies, robbers and germs in all times. The Creator sentenced you to be loser monkeys. Victory belongs to Muslims from the Nile to the Euphrates." The second allegation that the Secretary of State based her exclusion on is a quote in 2009, which was said to promote martyrdom. And it said, "Netanyahu's plan is to dig tunnels under Al-Aqsa and replace it with a Jewish temple. We will not compromise on our principles or holy sites. We prefer to die as shaheeds and will welcome death joyfully." And the final quote that the Secretary of State presented at that time is a quote dated 2007, in which it said that the Sheikh stated, "Israeli history is drenched in blood, and they want to build their temple while our blood is on their clothing, on their doorsteps, in their food, and in their water." Now, just to make it very clear, Sheikh Ra'ad Salah denied those quotes and the context of those quotes as gross misrepresentations of his position. Between the exclusion order, the deportation order, and Sheikh's challenge, his appeal of that, the Secretary of State was provided by her advisor, external from the Home Office advisor, a series of reports within which they contained many further allegations. And of those, the Secretary of State's lawyers and legal team were able to refine 5 points. And they were the full correct transcript of the 2003 point, but still with a grossly incorrect interpretation, a sermon which purported to contain the blood libel, Sheikh's views of the destruction of Al-Aqsa Mosque and his views on martyrdom, 2 Israeli police indictments, and his alleged relationship to Hamas. And it was said by the Secretary of State that these 5 elements came within the government's list of unacceptable behaviours, which is part of its prevent strategy. The judgment from the upper tribunal deals with each of these allegations, and of the 5 elements, reduces them down to only 2 of them, which potentially could have been appropriately considered. And we make it clear, and you can read it in the judgment, that the only 2 that Mr. Ockleton, who is the Vice President of the Upper Tribunal, stated may have some relevance to this case at all, was the allegation of the blood libel and the issue of martyrs. And that's it, from a massive portfolio of allegations that were levelled against the Sheikh. But what the tribunal said, very importantly, was that the Secretary of State for the Home Department should look at the Sheikh's profile as a whole. And it was the tribunal's view that all the other matters paled into insignificance and were actually irrelevant to her making this decision. The tribunal also stated that the evidence before the court was not a sample or the tip of the iceberg, but the entirety of the evidence that existed in respect to Sheikh Salah. So the only things that the Secretary of State could have considered were those 2 things. And let's not forget that Sheikh Salah is a prominent speaker who has in his time made thousands and thousands of speeches. And of those speeches, there were only 2 very minor elements upon which the Secretary of State could potentially consider exclusion. The judgment also stated that there was no evidence of Sheikh Salah's previous visits to this country or anywhere else promoting any of the unacceptable behaviours. It noted that he had been here also for 7 months without any evidence being provided that his presence in the United Kingdom was not conducive to the public good. And that's very important, because in exclusion decisions, the Secretary of State often has to speculate in respect of a person's future acts and what they're likely to do as a consequence of what they've previously done. And what the upper tribunal had before them was the Sheikh actually in the United Kingdom and the effect his presence actually had. And what the tribunal found was that there was no evidence that Sheikh's presence in the United Kingdom would be not conducive to the public good. And that's a very important aspect of this. Now, during the challenge of, during the appeal of the Secretary of State's personal decision, Sheikh based his challenge on three aspects. The first was the decision was not made in accordance with the law. And this is very important because some quarters of the press will run very quickly to say this is another victory for human rights. Well, it is another victory for human rights, but not just a victory for human rights. It's actually a victory. It's actually a victory on the tribunal looking at the merits of the case, the facts, and that's what's different in this case to most other exclusion order cases. What the Secretary of State did was base her decision entirely and completely comprehensively on facts which were incorrect. The tribunal found, amongst other things, that the Secretary of State had acted under a misapprehension of the facts. She was misled as to the terms of the point. She took irrelevant factors into consideration. Matters raised by the Secretary of State were not a fair portrayal of the Sheikh, his views or his words. There was no evidence that damage perceived by the Secretary of State was perceived by any other country anywhere else in the world, and you can imagine the Sheikh travels extensively, and that the deportation order was entirely unnecessary. And let's not forget, the Sheikh had to fund this process through his own financial resources. The Secretary of State, although she made a personal decision, she had the benefit of taxpayers' money to defend the appeal and to try to make sure that the exclusion order remained in place. In my view, that's a gross waste of money, a gross waste of money. I'm being told that I only have a very few minutes left, but what I want to do is just talk to you about how this arose. And the fact of the matter is that neither the tribunal or Sheikh's legal team are able to establish at this moment in time the source for the allegations against Sheikh Salah. And what I mean by that is that I can't understand why this started and why Sheikh was targeted in the way that he was. But what is interesting is that during the process of these proceedings and our investigation, we were able to look at some very important emails which the Home Office provided to us as part of a disclosure request. And let me tell you the following, because this is quite important. On the 17th of June, at 11:01, Michael Wine, who is the Director of the Government and International Affairs Department at the Community Security Trust, provided a report to Rod McLean, who is the Deputy Director of the Special Cases Directorate of the UK Border Agency. Just 17 minutes later, at 11:18, the Private Secretary of the Home Secretary sent an email to members of the Home Office which stated the following, in my view, very worrying words. And I'll read her very short email out in full. We understand that Ra'ed Salah, head of the Islamic movement in Israel, may have been invited to participate in a parliamentary event on 29th of June. Please could we have further advice on the event, whether he has been invited to speak, and if so, whether there is anything we can do to prevent him from attending. Open brackets, e.g., could we exclude him on the grounds of unacceptable behaviour, close brackets. The event is so soon, I would be grateful for urgent advice on this. Would it be possible to have something by Monday, Tuesday of next week? Happy to discuss this further. Now, that's the close of the email. This email is the email which betrays the inappropriate manner in which Theresa May carried out the role of banning Sheikh Ra'ed Salah. It appears that whatever information had been passed to her, she had at this point already decided to prevent a prominent voice of the Palestinian people speaking to parliamentarians in the Houses of Parliament. Now, it's not for the Home Secretary to decide who should or who should not speak to parliamentarians. The decision the Secretary of State took should have been made only after careful consideration of the facts. The facts should have been verified independently from organisations external to government and government officials. Now, that was not done. And that meant there was no safeguard. And that means that the Home Office and the Secretary of State left herself susceptible to being misled, and misled by a single external organisation which may or may not have had a political agenda. Let me just okay. Now, it's my view that we need an independent investigation into the manner in which the Secretary of State, Theresa May, took this personal decision in respect to Sheikh Salah and how she dealt with that. There needs to be an immediate review of every single exclusion order made by Theresa May to ensure that the evidence upon which those decisions are based are reliable. Because in every single other exclusion case, there is no right of appeal to a tribunal, by virtue of which there is an assessment of the facts before the Secretary of State. Because every other exclusion order can only be challenged by way of judicial review. And a judicial review does not hold the Secretary of State accountable for the factual basis upon the decisions that she makes. And I call today for an urgent review of every exclusion order made by the Secretary of State.
Thank you, Tayyip.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to start by saying how nice it is to be able to be in a normal room with Sheikh Ra'ed Salah, a man who I have spent some time with whilst he's been under very strict conditions, having to remain in his own home. I prefer to call it house arrest because that is in effect what it was. And I also pay a huge tribute to Memo, Palestine Solidarity, and his fantastic legal team for the work they've done ever since last summer when this awful train of events started. I organised the meeting in the House of Commons in the sense that I reserved the room and confirmed the invitation to the speakers of that meeting, including Sheikh Salah. And as has just been said, and it's quite correct, the Home Secretary has no business deciding who should or who should not come to Parliament, which MPs should invite who they want to Parliament. Surely that is the whole function of a parliamentary democracy, that MPs are open to discussion and persuasion from people of all ranges of opinion. And the revelations that the Home Secretary made this peremptory decision on the basis, I suspect, of prejudice rather than fact, and on that used her very considerable powers as Home Secretary to introduce an order which prevented Sheikh Salah from coming to Britain, but he'd already arrived, so there's some interesting questions, some dates to be examined there. And then the arrest, the imprisonment, and his denigration by large sections of the British media and quite a lot of members of Parliament who either remained silent throughout this process or joined in the general hue and cry that somehow or other Sheikh Salah is a dangerous man. He is far from a dangerous man. He's a very honoured citizen. He represents his people extremely well, and his is a voice that must be heard. The solutions to the issues facing the Palestinian people are not going to be achieved by overwhelming powers being used by European cabinet ministers, in this case the Home Secretary, to try to prevent him being heard. And he has fought a very tough campaign ever since last summer in order to assert his innocence and his right to visit this country and his right to speak freely to people in this country. And I hereby renew my invitation to Sheikh Salah to come to Parliament, meet with me, meet with my colleagues, and you will be assured a very warm welcome, and I look forward to giving you tea on the terrace, because you deserve it. The Home Secretary will probably not be in attendance while we're having this tea. But, as has also just been said, the question is of the powers of the Home Secretary and the need for an inquiry into this. Previous Home Secretaries have been forced out of office for less than this. I think we need an open, independent inquiry into the whole process, because the legal action's been taken as essentially being around immigration appeals and judicial review. You've not been able, quite correctly, to go into all of the information that the Home Office has at its disposal. I think it requires nothing less than an opening up of all of the books and all of the emails. Why was it the Home Secretary took such a sudden decision? Why was it that the media picked up the narrative that he was a dangerous man? Why did certain MPs get up in Parliament and demand that he be excluded from Britain? And why were there so few of us saying anything in the opposite direction? A democracy requires honesty, a democracy requires openness, and a democracy requires those that exercise power to be held to account for the power they hold, and held to account for the power that they use, and held to account for the effects of the power they've used. My apologies to Sheikh Salah for all that he's gone through in the past few months. I hope he won't feel badly about everyone in this country as a result of it, and I hope he will continue to visit here frequently, where he will be assured a very warm welcome from very large numbers of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeremy. Zahi. Zahi Nujaidat is the spokesman of the Islamic movement.
Again, thank you all for coming to this press conference. I must record a very special word of thanks to all those who supported and assisted us in our struggle for justice. We in the Islamic movement are very happy with the just decision of the Upper Immigration Tribunal. This ruling mitigated the immense feeling of sadness that many Muslims, Arabs, and Palestinians felt as a result of the injustices done to our leader, Sheikh Ra'id Salah, by the British government during the past 9.5 months. The court's decision means a lot to us. From the very beginning, we pointed out that Sheikh Ra'id never sought asylum or permanent residence in the United Kingdom. His sole purpose for remaining here this long has been to clear his name as a Muslim, Arab, and Palestinian leader, and to defend the legitimate issues that he supports. It is time to listen to us, Palestinian community within Israel, directly, without being influenced by any prejudicial view given about us by the State of Israel, its lobby, or any other sources. We are the ones who suffer discrimination in all walks of life. Our homes are being demolished, and our lands are being confiscated daily. Tens of our youngs were killed by the Israeli police. We suffer the impact of Israel's racist laws. And moreover, we actually feel that our existence in our homes and lands is threatened by the official Israeli policies. Indeed, Israeli leaders speak publicly about our removal from our lands. I take this opportunity to invite you to witness our condition. For all these reasons, we need to have the UK's doors open before us as a symbol of freedom and liberty. We believe it is necessary for us to communicate and engage in dialogue with politicians, academics, and the human rights organizations. The world needs to know about our condition. We cannot and must not suffer silently, even if while remaining steadfast. Naturally, we have our relations and belonging to the Palestinian people, the Arab world, and the Muslim Ummah. For this reason, we feel the collective pain of Israeli crimes in the occupied West Bank, Gaza Strip, Jerusalem, and Al-Aqsa Mosque. Israeli practices in the occupied territories are condemned as illegal by the United Nations. As such, we demand an unconditional and absolute end to the Israeli occupation of all our occupied lands. Such a natural and legitimate demand must never again be misrepresented as being anti-Semitic or racist. Thank you.
Thank you, Zahi. Ismail Patel, Chair of Friends of Al-Aqsa.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming. I would like to first express my thanks to the Upper Tribunal judge to have diligently gone through the evidence, the work that should have been done by the Home Secretary herself, and could have saved Sheikh Ra'id 10 months of misery and harsh bail conditions. However, the case raises very serious issues. It brings into the question the competency of the Home Secretary herself and in particularly her office. Public safety and interest is extremely important. However, this case has shown that the Home Secretary makes decisions not based on facts. In fact, we have also learned from this that when facts were presented to her, she failed to review that decision, and that is of a grave consequences. There are also, secondly, procedural issues to be addressed. It appears that it only takes 17 minutes for the Home Secretary to exclude somebody without having consulted her own experts, the security services, and also other parties concerned. This is also of great concern for the British public and the British citizens. However, the third factor we also need to take into consideration, that the Home Secretary appears to have an open door policy to pro-Israeli lobbyists, whereas it appears to have been completely shut to the pro-Palestinian lobbyists and those who are trying to find justice for the Palestinian people.
في سجلك حدث شيخ اسماعيل. شيخ بذكرك باللي حكيت طيب.